Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. I have a few comments to get to briefly, and then I got a bunch of other things to cover: Israel and Trump, and Kamala Harris commenting on Trump, and a bunch of other stuff. And the satellites, Elon Musk's and his even evil satellites and things. But let's start here. So one of my viewers left a comment about I showed you this guy who was well, I can just show you the video here in a second. I'll show you the clip from my previous video. But he was, practicing Ramadan where he was fasting. And he claimed a shawarma fell into his mouth. And he was wondering if it was Allah's grace. Let me show you the clip here. YouTube recommended this to me, and I'd want to start here. So, they fast is it Ramadan? In the Muslim tradition, there's fasting. Kyrie Irving, the basketball player, is fasting. There's a college basketball player who played for, I think, the North Carolina State, who was fasting. And it's hard to fast and go without water and play, food and water and play, competitive sport. But this guy is some kind of a sheik, and he gets a call. And again, I can't speak for the translation here.
مرحبا وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. يا شيخ اليوم بالغلط وقعت.
Today I accidentally fell. And a shawarma fell into my mouth. You can hear him say the word shawarma.
يا شيخ اليوم بالغلط وقعت ووقع في تمي شاورما مع زيادة طحينية.
With some extra tahini.
نعم. وكمان قطعة.
And a slice of apple.
وتقريبا 3 لتر مي.
And around 3 liters of water. Should I keep fasting?
مش عارف هل أكمل صيامي ولا أطعمني الله وسقاني.
Or was it Allah who has fed me? The guy's looking again. Great. Yeah, he fell down and a shawarma fell in his mouth with extra tahini and a slice of apple and some water. 3 liters of it. And, maybe it was Allah who fed him and not, him cheating on his religion. So my viewer said the following. Let's see if I have the comment here. I want to verify the Ramadan shawarma call is exactly translated, and it makes me laugh every single year. Every Ramadan this video shows up. I love it so much. LOL. Have a great week. So this is somebody who I guess speaks the language. So I had no way to translate that, but he did say the word shawarma. So, and then there's been this validation. So the other thing I just want to respond to was the comments that I got. So many people saying that they felt weird about the eclipse. Like I breathed a sigh of relief when I came inside. My wife and I were, we had the glasses, but I wasn't into really looking at it. But the light was weird, and I felt it. Like I just didn't feel good about being out there for whatever energy eclipse brings. I've been around them before, but this one felt weird. Like nothing big happened in the world. They were saying there was going to be some big event or whatever, and nothing like that happened, but it didn't feel good. And so many people said they had similar experiences. Some people were feeling this way before and, for some time, for like a week or so before the thing. But it was, definitely not it didn't have good energy. It didn't have, it was discombobulating. And many of us experienced that, which I found was interesting. Like I got so many comments of people saying the same thing. But anyways, let's get into something else that's discombobulating. So this says evolution of the Starlink in the last 4 years. And it starts here. Turn the music off. September 19th, there's just that many satellites. And then, you can just see them adding all these satellites. And, there's already too many satellites before that. But look at that, right? It's just, it's oppressive, and the thing doesn't even work. Like, I tried it. and it was inconsistent and didn't get good speeds, which was a bummer for me, but it's, the thing doesn't even work well. And now there's this web of satellites, which, let me get into this here. There's just, negativity associated with this, right? And on a spiritual level, it's disrupting. Let me switch over to my voiceover here, but you can just look at the thing. I mean, you just see this, and it's crazy. Like, that is freaking crazy, and that's affecting our atmosphere and our environment. We have water in our system, and we have electricity in our system, and we're sensitive and affected by electricity, because you know what happens when we get struck by lightning, or we have, get electrocuted or something like that, right? You feel that, what a shock does for you. Of course, being tased and tasered would be an extreme example of that. But we have minor levels of that because we know what a microwave does to flesh, to meat. You can see, put a steak or something in the microwave and overcook it, and you can see it rearrange the molecules, and and it's pretty brutal what it can do to a living organism. And we've had microwaves beaming around our house and our smart meter and in 4G for a number of years now. Of course, millimeter waves for 5G. There's a video on these EMFs from NASA, and it talks about how we're being bombarded. It uses the word bombardment in terms of all these different things we're using. Our remote controls, Bluetooth, all these different things have different wavelengths and different vibratory factors that affect all of us. And we know that these things go through buildings, right? We have, Wi-Fi from your next door neighbor going through walls and all these other things, right? You can see that there's Wi-Fi available from, you live in an apartment complex. Years ago when we came back from India, they hooked up the internet at my house, and the guy showed me he had this meter that showed all the different networks that were in the building. This was in Vegas, and there was hundreds of people having their own personal networks, and they were, available in my apartment, right? So they're all there. We're being bombarded with all these different energies, and it affects us. And it talks about electromagnetic pollution in Whispers of the Brighter World. There's so many articles, there's so many messages. These are these channeled messages from the Sagemark system. This is Sunday, October 15, 2000. This French medium was taking down these channeled messages. Pollution from electricity has drawn your attention for a long time. It is devastating, and human beings suffer the consequences in their subtle bodies, which they then pass on to their physical bodies. The Earth is surrounded by a kind of net which is seriously harms the gaseous exchange. This is satellites. This results in disturbances affecting the whole of the biosphere. The phenomena are felt all the way down to the infinitely small. Your energies try to adapt to these turbulences. Certain areas of the world are more affected than others. The oceans play an important role. They represent an enormous amount of water, which neutralizes part of this pervading negativity, but there are limits to this process. The polarity of the Earth, which is necessary for its balance, is being thwarted. New energies will have to be used in the future for the good of the planet, its inhabitants. Cries of alarm have been put forth for years by enlightened researchers, whose pronouncements have received no follow-up. Only absolute necessity will force decisions by those countries who hold the greatest power. There remains a long way to lead human beings to the greater wisdom. The supremacy of money is boundless. God's decisions be made. May good decisions be made in this time for the good of humanity. Babaji. Babaji's the second master of this Sagemark system, who passed away in 1983, but he started giving these messages to this French woman years and years ago. But, they know that this stuff affects people negatively. They've done testing. They have to do testing before putting something out in the environment. And we see all these things with animals acting strangely. And, 5G is, who knows what the effects have been, I mean, the cardiac arrest and these things that are happening to people, that could be more 5G related than anything else. And there's no way for us to know. I mean, sometimes people are sensitive to this. When I had COVID, the router was inside my room. And I just one day, when I was like having trouble breathing in the middle of the day, it was just weird stuff that was happening. Like sometimes I would be fine, then sometimes I would have these issues. But I drilled a hole in the wall and I moved the router outside the room. And, it was still penetrating, but it was farther away. And I felt like a sense of relief, like not just in terms of having COVID, but in general. Like having the router right there was a problem. But, all these things, and like I said, I tried the Elon Musk Wi-Fi and it sucks, but it's still, being beamed down all over the place now, right? I mean, the Wi-Fi is coming in through these satellites, through, this process, and he's got all those satellites. And it's negatively affecting us and the environment. And, we need our Wi-Fi, but not at that price and not at that cost. And that's what's affecting all of us in some ways or another. And, we don't even know the effects because it happens on an energetic level. It's much more subtle. There are things that kill you, then there are things that weaken you, right? And there are a lot of things that kill you in small amounts will just weaken you. And that's what we're dealing with in terms of electricity, electromagnetic frequencies and these things pulsating through our walls. There's people who have had, bad electricity, like it's like some sort of a vortex for these energies, and they can't live in their houses. Like they have to move because they're just in this place where all this energy sort of gets focused. Or, there's all this stuff to do with like power grids and ley lines and things to do with the planet. And, they know about, the people running the planet know these things. And they don't care because, depopulation's part of it and weakening people's another, and, it serves their purpose. But, for the rest of us, we're less than we would normally be. And many times people are agitated and irritable and things because of these things and aren't, feel bad, but they don't know why. Again, something that's invisible, we wouldn't even know it's there if we weren't receiving, the only time we know it's there when we don't have it, right? When we're like, oh, it's not, the Wi-Fi's not working, right? But other than that, there might be some people that are sensitive enough or, they can feel the effects of it when it's on and when it's off. Like I flirted with that. Like I said, when I got the thing out of my room, I felt better. But, one way to tell is whenever I've gone out, by the ocean is one place, or going out into the woods where there's very little of it, and you breathe a sigh of relief because you're just away from the electricity and you can feel better. Like you just, you feel better when you're out in the desert or someplace in nature where there's not as much of this concentrated or some not at all, right? My family and I, years ago, we went to the north side of the Grand Canyon, and we were driving past it, and we didn't have GPS, and it was nice. I was like, oh, man, we didn't have any kind of a signal, which was great. But anyways, let's get into the other stuff here.
This is how U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been greeted for over 70 days by anti-genocide protesters.
Shame! Shame! When he leaves in the morning, we drop blood on him, and when he comes home in the evening, we drop some more.
Just to balance out the day, right? We can't just drop blood in the morning and then leave him hanging at night, right?
These activists have staged a round-the-clock encampment that they call Kibbutz Blinken outside the Secretary of State's home. They want to hold him accountable for his role in Israel's U.S.-backed war on Gaza.
And to Blinken, who we believe is directly responsible for supporting and whitewashing Israel's horrendous war crimes, we want it to be like, we're here, we're watching you, and that is why we are at his personal home.
I spoke to Hazemi Barmada, who's leading the encampment. She's been using Instagram to document the protests, which begin first thing in the morning.
Wakey, wakey, you war criminal!
Best alarm clock ever.
And continue making noise until 9 p.m.
Ceasefire now!
The victims of your foreign policy, the victims of your cowardly decisions, literally live with the repercussions 24/7.
He needs to be disrupted 24/7. Absolutely no breaks, no rest for this man.
We are now your neighbors. So we called it kibbutz based on the romanticization of Israeli settlements.
Israelis, they tend to think stealing land is really cool. They've been doing it for the past 76 years. So we decided we're going to create our own settlement here.
Because oddly enough, two wrongs do make a right.
Some of the protesters have camped out for weeks on the public side of the street.
We had snow, we had flooding. It was super, super cold. It wasn't easy. We just have to do it because not doing anything is just not an option.
You're Netanyahu's lapdog!
As U.S. Secretary of State, Blinken has bypassed Congress twice since October 7th to authorize hundreds of millions of dollars in weapon sales for Israel to use in its war on Gaza.
Talk to me about the moments where you have had encounters with him.
The encounters that we've had with him have been pretty intense. Welcome home, you war criminal!
Aww.
The moments where he gets out of his car and gets into his home, we know that we have a captive audience for a couple of seconds. I want him to feel our rage. I want him to feel our pain. Imagine your own child buried under rubble. Call it self-defense. It is not self-defense. It is a genocide, and you know it.
That's the best we can do is raise our voices.
Is it the best you can do, though? Because, we'll get into it in a bit here. But we know that protests don't work. And we know what Israel believes is their, whatever their land is, or whatever they consider their land. And so they don't care. And America doesn't care either. I mean, politically, they'll say things or they'll pretend they're upset with what Israel's doing, but they don't care how upset you are or how angry you are. So it has no effect on the outcome. It's not going to change a thing. You could have 1 million people outside of his house. You could harass him. They could grab him, kidnap him, whatever they do. They could do destruction, to the whatever it is, right? To have violent mob raising protests is not going to change a thing. It's not going to affect their policies or their decisions. We know this. I've said this over and over. Protests don't work. What they usually do is they make it so that more laws are enacted and more restrictions, and it benefits the powers that be. Protests are good for them because when they go south, the protests, the people that run the system can change the conversation to the genocide that's happening in Israel, in Gaza, in Palestine, and they can talk about how bad the protesters are. It's the same thing they do with the truth community. I mean, that's what they do, right? You haven't recognized what they do. They stop talking about the wrongs that the truth community is pointing out, the wrongs that the protesters are pointing out, and they demonize the truth community and say, you're the real threat. Have you seen that play out over and over again? That's how they deal with it. And so when you raise your voice and you object to these things, it has no effect. Like I said, there's boycotting, which is possibly, whatever it is. And there's the overthrow of the government, but then you're even worse off because there's no, that's just chaos. So there's no solution to any of these things because they don't care what you think. They're disconnected from you, the decision makers, the people who run the system. And until they run the system in the ground, they're just going to do whatever they want to do. And, they'll pretend that they're placating you or they'll pretend that they agree with you to some extent. And they hear your concerns, but it's not going to affect the outcome of their decisions and the outcomes of any of these things, right? And so it's just you out there having a tantrum and, verbalizing your anger and having no real, it's being completely impotent. And we've seen it over and over again. Like we have like more than a sample size to see what protests result in. And it's usually either nothing or restrictions for the people, more control for the powers that be. It benefits the powers that be. They want you to protest, right?
We're peaceful protesters. It's kind of ironic that he has all these guards around him when he's the one responsible for killing civilians.
So you think Anthony Blinken is responsible, right? You think Anthony Blinken is responsible, right? That's what you think? That he's the guy that's responsible for this? Of course he's not. He's a puppet just like the president and all these, I mean, it's an inability to understand the situation. There's a time that the third master of the Sajmark system, someone came up to him and said, like an American came up and said, why would God allow all these things to happen? Why would God, you know, allow all the terrible things to happen? And he said, wait, you think God's running this planet? You think God's in charge, right? And so you understand the nefarious nature of what's gone on now. There's people that have hijacked the purpose of this planet and the people that inhabit it, and they're not going to change their ways because you're upset about it. They know you're upset about it. They dig that. They enjoy you being upset about it. They feed off your pain.
I'm so proud of how intergenerational this is. They always tell me it's like group grieving.
My father is a Nakba survivor. I broke down because he was acting natural with his wife and kids. Like, life went on for him, and all I could see in front of me is all the dead children in Gaza, and I broke down and cried.
Blinken says his kids are bothered while kids in Gaza are being slaughtered.
The genocide doesn't sleep. People in Gaza are being bombed around.
And the only thing that this has anything to do with is your emotional reaction. It has nothing to do with stopping that or affecting life for them or changing anything or helping them. And so there's a disconnect here. The people who protest have to realize that it is, it's like you're trying to build a house by throwing something against another house, right? Like, you have to actually dig a foundation. You have to, lay a pad, put in the various support beams and things like this. Like you get an architect and you need a plan. Like, you just can't, do something that doesn't have the effect that you desire, which is stopping the genocide. And so you have to figure out, how can we stop the genocide? You're just copying whatever other morons have done for centuries, which is to go out and have a tantrum. It has no effect on anything, right? Okay, we'll get back to Israel in a second. Happening now, there is a large investigation underway at the Satanic Temple of Salem, and the public is being asked to avoid the area. This is a NBC Boston, Channel 10, like a real news station. Netanyahu, here it is. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declares Israel will invade Rafah in southern Gaza Strip, declaring there is a date. They have to go for it, right? Like, I've talked about this before. This is the Israel of the Bible. And these people believe that this is land promised to them by God. At least they either believe that or they want to believe it, depending on the people. And they, are taking advantage of other people who believe it. But evangelical Christians believe it, people in America, and, this is their point of view. And so they believe Israel is theirs and not the Palestinians. There is no Palestine. That's why there can be no Palestinian state, because they're claiming part of the land that was promised to them by God. And America's going to fall from grace. Like, America will eventually no longer be the superpower that it is. And so it's Israel's only friend. And they got to go for this while America's still in power. And so no protests, no anything's going to stop them, because they're pushing for this, right? And this is the small area that they're going to go for at first, but this is the greater area, which I got to believe that at some point they're going to try, they want to make a run for this. And think about the kind of chaos that it would have to happen for this to be on the table, that they would grab all this land, right? Surrounding land. This is activity on the San Andreas Fault. Apparently, California's poised for another major earthquake this year, says new study tracking San Andreas Fault activity. Biden says he expects Iranian strike on Israel sooner than later. U.S. officials have expressed concern that Tehran may go after targets in Israel in retaliation for Israeli airstrikes in Syria last week that killed senior Iranian officials. And so once Iran gets in, then, Russia's going to get in, and this is, again, World War III. Iranian special forces seized ship in the Strait of Hormuz, state media reports, and helicopter raid Navy special forces from Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps boarded and seized the MSC Ares, the IRNA news agency reported. So, I mean, we're just edging closer to World War III here. Indian police spot glowing UFO zigzagging over a nuclear power plant, mirroring reports of craft at sensitive bases in the U.S. So there are UFO activity at nuclear bases. So, that's always disturbing. And then Elon Musk, well, he said this here.
And a warning from Tesla Motors CEO Elon Musk. It has nothing to do with cars. Instead, Musk warns about artificial intelligence, which he has called more dangerous than nuclear weapons. Musk spoke at a symposium at MIT.
I mean, with
This is like 12 years ago.
artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon. You know those stories where there's the guy with the pentagram and the holy water, and he's like, yeah, you sure you can control the demon? Didn't work out.
I take it there will be no HAL 9000 going up to Mars.
HAL 9000 would be easy. It's way more complex than, I mean, it would put HAL 9000 to shame. Yeah. Sounds like a puppy dog.
Of course, referencing Space Odyssey. Following his next...
Okay, so there's that. If you ever saw the movie 2001, there is a AI computer. This is a movie made in the 70s, I think. Stanley Kubrick, right, the guy who supposedly faked the moon landing. But he did Eyes Wide Shut. He made this movie called 2001, and it was about a AI computer that kills all of the crew except for this last guy. And so he has to shut him down. And he's shutting down Hal at the end of the movie. It's been years since I've seen it. 2001, A Space Odyssey. And, that's what the guy's saying. And Elon Musk, maybe, I don't know, I think this was like 10 years ago, was talking about AI. Of course, he's polluting the sky with all these satellites. So there's all of that, There's like the truth of what he's doing. And so I was making my Journey series video yesterday, and, I wanted to talk about what it is to be a spiritual person and success and how success is defined. It's not defined by material standards. It's defined by service. So I wanted to include that audio here. To be a spiritual person, to be a saint, success is defined by sacrifice and service. If you're a spiritual person, it's defined by your level of commitment to serve God and the sacrifices you have to go through to become a higher developed soul. The spiritual cleaning you need to go through, the intense spiritual cleaning. And, all the things that need to be cleaned out. And that takes difficulties. That takes going through miseries. And so when you're committed to serving God, if you say, and I'm not talking about a religious, being a religious person, that's, your perception of God is important, but you have to have a connection to God internally and not some idea of God and not some, like serving God by propagating a religion isn't serving God, right? I mean, I guess maybe in some small way it is. But what I'm talking about here is connecting to the God internally and then saying to that, divinity within you, I'm going to sacrifice my, material life so that I can serve you. And there's going to be, choice points and things you have to go through to serve God, and therefore you serve your fellow brothers and sisters because, one, you become saintly because you go through the cleansing period and you're a spiritual evolution, both of which can be painful and will be painful. And you're sacrificing your, personal needs and things to do God's work, and I'm not saying like go out and feed the poor and things. That's service, like that's community service, which isn't a bad thing, but that's not what I'm talking about. It's not, doing miracles, things that people think about in Christianity. That's none of those things. This is purely spiritual service where you're helping to elevate people spiritually. You can be nice to people and kind to people and help them in their material life. You could feed a poor person. You can, give charity. I mean, and I'm not saying those things are bad, but what I'm talking about is elevating other people spiritually by elevating yourself and then helping to pull up these other people. And in spirituality, it's one thing, and it's service and sacrifice. It isn't that you're smart and you're clever and you come up with inventions, or you're great at singer, or athlete, or whatever things in the material life, right? Things that boost your ego. I'm not talking about material success in any way, where you get an award and people notice you and recognize you. No material success has anything to do with this. Usually it hurts this process. This is where you just sacrifice your own personal needs and things to serve God. And through this process, you pull other people up to a higher level. They're inspired by you, and you're able to do spiritual work and things that, maybe people don't even know. Maybe you don't even know, right? But through your commitment to serve God, and by doing that, like internally, and working through that process, you're elevated. And, there's a level of, there should be a level of appreciation and gratitude for someone who does that, because, there's pain and suffering involved, right? It's counteractive to what we think about being happy and being, seeking pleasure and doing things our ego wants us to do, and self-aggrandizing things that are just things that, you can be proud about, or people congratulate you on, the things that people aspire to be, having a good life. It's the opposite of those things. And sometimes rendering service to God is saying things and doing things that make people upset at you. Like, you see in the case of Jesus and the crucifixion, right? Again, like that's not the best example of his life because of the way that they've warped his story. But, there was service and sacrifice for what he did, right? Isn't the greatest example, but, is, the example that most of us grew up seeing as being the pinnacle. And again, it's not the suffering that, the crucifixion and the story that they give you now in Christianity, but it's the fact that he was willing to suffer, and his disciples were willing to suffer, and saints were willing to suffer to evolve spiritually and help other people. And in that process, became a threat to the powers that be, and in terms of the regular people themselves who didn't want to change. And so, part of it is you ruffle the egos of other people, right? Things that I say here that are spiritual that people react to. That's me rendering them service, even though they're not willing to accept it, or they're not willing to, evolve because of it. It's something that's they're not happy about, but it's doing service. It's doing service to God, and it has the potential to help other people, whether they're willing to look at it or be, willing to see it or not. But it isn't like, you think about it in that sense. You just are asking God, what can I do to serve you? And then you're given an answer, and you do that work. And that work always involves sacrifice and suffering and things, because it just does. And part of it is your spiritual evolution and, working through all those things. But that's the definition of success as a spiritual person. It's the exact opposite of material success, where there's accomplishments and there's rewards for those accomplishments, and often, pleasure and happily ever after and things you think about in our stories. None of that exists. The service to God and the reward for the service of God. One of the things that Master Charji, the third master of the Sajmark system, said, the reward for work is more work. And so, that's, it's just doing the work and getting more work and higher work and sacrificing more and doing more for God, right? That's the definition of success. And it's, again, something that's completely opposite of everything that we've learned or thought about being successful in the world. It's the opposite of, achievement, achievement of personal achievement and things, and egotistical achievement and material success. There's people that compare themselves, like Marcola recently thought like he's Jesus, right? And Jesus is the only person that, the saintly person that Americans grow up understanding being, he's the pinnacle without any understanding of the whole stratosphere of spiritual people, saints, and so forth. But in our society, success is having a big ego and being, canonized like as a material saint or something because of your success, being a star, being somebody of, who's risen to the top of fame and fortune, but then they tear you down, which is similar to the way that saints are treated in the, biblical, in just all of Western civilization, Europe and American things. Spiritual people are sort of celebrated in the beginning and then destroyed later, and they've done this with celebrities and people like this. And it creates a dramatic story, but it isn't real success because your success isn't defined by what other people think of you or even what you think of yourself. It's about your commitment on a soul level and minimizing your egotistical pursuits and spending your time and energy in doing God's work, and not just, be kind or be nice or be charitable, but figuring out what God wants you to do, connecting to God at a deep level and understanding what your path is and what you're supposed to be doing, and then doing that, despite what is best for you or what you want to do, or, whether it hurts you or not, or whether, there's suffering or not, because there will be. There has to be suffering, because if it was easy and it was, pleasurable, everyone would be doing it. There's very few spiritual people because doing spiritual things involves doing what you don't want to do and doing things that are, ultimately unpleasant for you, and taking on work that, there's no glory in it. There's no any of those things. If there's any of those things for you, then it makes it easy to do. It makes it something that your ego wants to do, right? And so it's, again, if your ego is into serving God, that's one thing, but there's going to be negativity coming back at you because this is the way the planet works. And, true spiritual work happens on a level that's not recognized on the material level. It's something that's beyond the third dimensional plane of existence. Anyways, I just thought I would add those things from this earlier voiceover I did today, for my Journey series. Only spirituality will save this world. It's paramount, definitely important to the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.